the University of Barcelona for this conference. And now we're going to turn to the next speaker. So I'm to present myself very briefly. Javier de Regoyos is my name, correspondent from Radio Tres. I've been invited to try and moderate and present the different speakers. I've arrived late. I apologize. I want to apologize. It's due to my work. It's been a very complicated day at work. And very briefly, I'm going to offer you the small introduction that I'd prepared.
Perspective. I don't know if you know Amenábar's movie Agora. I think the most of you know it. It happens in the city of Alexandria in 391 after Christ. Raquel Welch is a mathematician and philosopher, an astronomer. She's finally killed in the name of religion. Religion, we can see what happens with ISIS, could be like nationalism in some aspects. It moves hearts people beyond rationality. And is able to manipulate people, a lot of people at the same time, with feelings beyond reality and rationality. Coming back to the film Agora, maybe you didn't notice, but if it isn't the case, I advise you to watch it again. At the beginning, the movie starts in the lonely interstellar space. Everything is empty, no noise. Little by little, we find Earth, and noise come back, and we go down towards Alexandria. I was trying to explain that we are like ants, and in Amenábar movie, sometimes we see how the movements are different of crowds, and that is what we are trying now with the professors here, try how we can move it from another perspective. Now it's Professor Carsten de Dreu. Hello, Professor. Es profesor de Psicología Organizacional.
He's a professor of organizational and social psychology from the University of Leiden and the University of Amsterdam. In his research, he centered himself in the study of regulation of conflict and the neurological basics on cooperative decision-taking. His study on oxytocin in human groups have been very much discussed in different media. His presentation that we're going to listen to today is entitled Neurobiological Foundations of Parochialism. You have the floor.
Thank you. I think, do I have to speak in the mic, or can you all hear me?
I think it's good. We can listen to you.
The translation. The problem is the translation.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, then I will sit down and is this for the translation okay? Thank you. All right, I will speed up a little bit. I have a train to catch in not too long from now, so you have to bear with about 30 minutes. And I will briefly go over a series of studies that we have done in the past few years, probing human tendencies to self-sacrifice, to make parochial, altruistic choices in the context of intergroup conflict. At a broader level, you could argue that this relates to a tendency in humans to cater for their own group or their own society or their own parochial system. All right, so as a brief starter, here you see two pictures. The picture on the left is Walter Susskind, who was a Austrian refugee into the Netherlands prior to World War II. And during the World War, he lived in Amsterdam, and partly through his close connections with the German occupants, he was able to rescue about 600 Jewish children from the gas chambers. So we call him a hero, right? He was catering for his own group, risking his own life. Actually, he was deported in the end of 44 and killed, together with his two daughters and his wife. So we call him a hero because he self-sacrificed ultimately with his life to save those of his own kin and kith, his in-group, we would call it. To the right-hand side, you see a picture of the terrorists who attacked the World Trade Center in New York about 15 years ago. They also self-sacrificed with their lives and also for the greater good of their own group, to promote the cause of their group, yet we call them fanatics. So to some extent this is in semantics, and to some extent this also may reveal that there is something very fundamental perhaps to our tendency to be able to self-sacrifice, ultimately with our lives, for the greater good of our own group and its cause. So what I'm talking about here is groups of people sharing a common purpose, who operate within the context of a competitive or conflictual intergroup context, and who can bring their group goal closer by strong self-sacrifice, by being self-sacrificial, that is making personally costly contributions to their own group, including the defense and the aggression of outgroups. And the question I'd like to address here through a series of studies is whether this type of tendencies that I've just explained to you are limited to a small group of fanatics and heroes, very special humans, or whether we all have certain residuals of those within ourselves and that can come about under certain circumstances. And if that's the case, what are those circumstances and how can we identify those? I ground my work in a couple of theoretical perspectives. One is evolutionary theory, which basically looks at human behavior and its preparedness over the course of millennia and generations and generations. And the idea basically is that throughout evolutionary times, humans have been selected for, and certain characteristics and traits and behaviors have been favored in or out of our biological makeup. And there are famous group and cultural selection models. I won't go into detail now about those, but they're basically arguing that we have throughout evolution become biologically prepared not only to compete with each other for reproduction, but also to cooperate with each other to find the benefits of group living. And parts of those is that we are not only willing to self-sacrifice, to make contributions to our own group, because if your group is strong, you benefit from that as an individual. So a strong group has individual benefits, survival benefits if you want. And part of that contributions to your own group includes being aggressive towards outgroups, rivaling outgroups that may at some point be a threat to your own group and thereby yourself. The second class of theories is the bounded generalized reciprocity theory, which basically argues the same, except that it doesn't need the outgroup, the intergroup competition, for people to have become prepared to cater for their own group. So here the idea is really about the tribal mindset. Humans have been living in groups, in small tribes, if you want, for the most of our evolutionary trajectories. And throughout that evolution trajectories, we have become prepared to cater for our own groups, to help others, to empathize with others, to conform to within group norms and rituals. And we have seen some examples from neuroscience showing that indeed we have kind of this herding tendency. Now we can also look at this from more proximal theories that are closer to social cognitive neuroscience that we have also seen some examples about already. And there are two classes of theories. One is the realistic conflict theory, which basically argues that within the context of intergroup competition, humans are very willing and able to cooperate with their own group and to self-sacrifice and to make personally costly contributions to your own group in order to win the competition with a rivaling outgroup. And this can be motivated either by greed, we want to oppress the outgroup and get their resources, or it can be motivated by fear. Basically, we aggress them before they can aggress us. It's like a preemptive strike type of reasoning. And then finally, within social psychology primarily, there has been a social identity theory developed by Tashful and Turner, and it basically looks at a very low-level, immediate reason for why people would align with their own group and perhaps derogate and be negative about rivaling outgroups. And the idea here is that people want to feel good about themselves, and part of their self-image derives from their group membership. So if you make your own group look good, it automatically means that you will look good, and that feels nice. So that's in essence social identity theory. Okay. So I will show you now a couple of examples of studies and series of studies addressing a few of these questions. I will skip the second part. Basically, yes, it does. Reputation concerns matter. All right, let's go. So a first question that we want to ask here is whether a tendency to favor your own group, to make a costly contribution to your own group, is it driven primarily by a desire to have a strong own group, and or by a desire to hurt and derogate and downplay rivaling outgroups? So is it in-group love, or is it out-group hate, or is it perhaps both? And to answer this question, we collected a lot of studies that have been done in the past 40 years in economics, in sociology, and in psychology, using so-called economic games. And in economic games, what people do basically is they're provided with a choice that is costly to themselves, yet can be beneficial to one or more other people in that particular context. So basically, I have 10 euros, for example, and I can keep them to myself and take it home, or I can use all or part of those 10 euros to contribute to some other people in this room, and every euro that I give to some other people will be multiplied by some factor X. Thereby, the 10 euros may become more valuable at the collective level, yet I do not benefit from that immediately. I pay a cost to benefit the collective. And the question that is addressed in many of these studies in the past 40 years is whether I would be more willing to give up my own money to benefit someone that I see belongs to my own group compared to someone that I see as belonging to some other group. Now, from a rational choice perspective, you should not see a difference. There is no reason to, from a game theoretical perspective, there is no reason to give up money in general and to discriminate between someone that belongs to your own group or to some other outgroup. Yet in these studies, that can be compared. And there's an interesting twist to many of these studies, and that is that we not only have people from your own group, but we have also people from rivaling, competing outgroups, and we have people you do not have any information about. They could be in-group, they could be out-group. We call them here unknown strangers. What you see here, the higher the bar, from the more positive deviation from zero, the greater people discriminate in their self-sacrificial tendencies between an in-group and an out-group member. So the red bar basically shows that you are much more likely to give up your own money when it benefits someone in your own group than when it benefits someone in a rivaling out-group. The blue bar shows that we have a much stronger tendency to give up money to benefit someone from our own group than some unknown stranger. And then the gray bar shows that there is basically no difference in the extent to which we give up money to favor, to benefit a rivaling outgroup member compared to an unknown stranger. And if you put these three bars together, it means that our tendency to favor the in-group is because we want to love the in-group rather than hate the out-group. Because if that were the case, we should have seen that the gray bar would have been tremendously more negative. Okay? I leave the inference to you to ponder and move on. So the basic outcome of these studies, across 40 years, 200 studies done in many different countries with many different types of subjects, essentially show that our tendency to self-sacrifice for the benefit of the in-group is driven by a desire to like and improve the functioning of our own group, rather than a desire to hurt and derogate and undermine competitive outgroups. Now, who does this more? Here is a very nice study by a series of economists, one actually located in Barcelona. This is Jordi Brands. So, what they did in this study was combine, they had people come into the laboratory and they asked these people to make a choice in a so-called social dilemma, to sacrifice money, to give up money. And some people did this a lot and other people did not do that at all. And thereby they could classify people as what they call pro-socials, who are generous, and more selfish, individualistic types who are not very generous. And then later on these people came back to the laboratory and they were put in small groups. And this was done in such a way that everybody who was generous in the previous task was put together. So now we have groups of pro-social people. And other people who were selfish were also put together. We have now groups of selfish people. And these groups were playing an intergroup conflict game against other groups of the same type. So pro-social groups are playing a conflict against another pro-social group, or individualistic selfish groups are playing a conflict against selfish groups. And the conflict's very simple. Every individual in the group donates into a collective pot. On both sides we have a collective pot. We compare how much is in these two pots, and the pot that is largest wins the contest and earns a bonus. And what you see here, the red line is the value of the bonus. The green dashed lines are the Nash equilibria, basically saying that you should not contribute because this is a ridiculously wasteful game. Intergroup conflict is wasteful. And what you do see is the dotted lines on top, especially the dark one on top. That is how much people contribute. So people contribute more to an intergroup contest than they can win from the intergroup contest. All right? This essentially shows how wasteful intergroup conflict can be. The interesting thing to me, however, is what you see on the right-hand side. And what we see there is a comparison between groups of pro-social people fighting with each other compared, those are the most right-hand bars, the pro-socials on the two right-hand bars, and then the egoistic groups. And in both cases, there are two treatments with and without punishment, I won't go into detail here. In both cases, what we see is that the pro-social groups on both sides invest more in the intergroup conflict than the selfish types do. Selfish types are, in a game theoretic sense, more rational. Pro-socials are very good soldiers. They fight like hell. These are the people who value justice. These are the people who value fairness. These are the people who are generous. These are the people who fight and sacrifice their lives in the context of intergroup conflict. We have replicated this independently using a different task that I will not go into detail now, and I hope you just believe me that this is an even stronger study than those by the Spanish colleagues. Okay, now the next question is, would this self-sacrifice that people do in the context of intergroup conflict, a self-sacrifice to benefit your own group, would this be a deliberated choice, something where we need our prefrontal cortex? Or, if evolutionary theory is right, is this something that we do almost automatically, that we do not need a lot of thinking capacity for? And to study this, we designed a very simple task, which you see on the right-hand side. And I'll explain to you very briefly. People come into the laboratory in groups of 6, and they're randomly divided into 2 groups of 3 people. Each individual gets 10 euros that he can take home and do nothing with, or whatever he wants to do with it. Or he can use the 10 euros partly or entirely to contribute to 2 distinct pools. One is called the, here it's called the in-group love pool. We call it simply the within-group pool. Every euro that you invest there returns 50 cents to every member of your group. 3 people, yourself included. So every euro invested in your own group becomes €1.50 divided by 3. So it's a cost to yourself because the return on €1 is 50 cents to you, but 2 other people also earn 50 cents. So at the collective level, it's efficient. And you can use your euros to invest in the out-group hate pool, or what we call the between-group pool. Now, if you do that, every member of your own in-group also gets 50 cents, same as before. But in addition to this, every member of the other group, which was randomly created, right? The other group now gets a punishment of 50 cents. Now, to me, as an experimenter, it would be lovely if all subjects contribute all their money to this between-group, out-group hate. Because then the gains to the in-group are offset by the losses to the out-group, and vice versa, and I don't have to pay them anything. The worst case for me would be if all individuals in my experiments contribute all their euros to the within-group pool, because that means that each group becomes richer, and I have to pay every individual 15 instead of 10 euros. Okay? So here is the thing. Now, before people were playing this game, making their investment decisions, they went through a Stroop Interference task. And this is what you see on the left-hand side of the slide. Basically, what we asked them to do is to indicate in what word, in what color the word is written. So on the top you see the word red is written in red. The word blue is written in blue. So this is easy to do, right? So we basically have people go through 40 of these trials, and they are, you know, happy as ever because it doesn't take you a lot of cognitive effort to do this right. But now let's go to the bottom. In what color is the word written? The word says red, but it's written in green. And if you do this for yourself, don't speak out loud because it gets noisy. But if you do this for yourself, you will notice that it is a little bit difficult to do. And each time, sometimes you even make an error. You would say blue. No, sorry, red. And this is precisely what is going on in this task. So people go through a lot of these difficult trials, and after that, indeed, they report being more fatigued, they're more tired, and they have less energy left for difficult tasks. In essence, and this is what neuroscience also tells us, their prefrontal control areas are somewhat at rest after they have done such a task. And people prefer not to use their thinking capacity for tasks that they have to do thereafter. So if you've gone through the top Stroop, you should be able to use your thinking capacity more than when you go through the bottom Stroop. And here are the results. If you look at the lower left chart there, what you see is that people who have been through the easy task keep more money to themselves than people who have done the depleting task. People who do not prefer not to think spend more money. They become more altruistic. Where does the money go? It goes a little bit to your own in-group, and it goes significantly to punishing out-groups. So by depleting people's cognitive ability and their willingness to think and to ponder their investment decisions, people become a little bit more competitive in the intergroup context. And we have replicated these findings a couple of times now. I believe they're pretty robust. Now, this is what I've shown you. People like to benefit the in-group more than they like to hurt out-groups. And this tendency is an intuitive rather than more calculated response. Where is it residing? I think when I was introduced, it was promised that I would talk about oxytocin as a possible neurobiological substrate or circuitry underlying this tendency to self-sacrifice in the context of intergroup conflict, your parochial altruism, as some have called it. Oxytocin is a molecule that is produced in the hypothalamus, part of our brain, and it is very important for two key things. For reproduction, that is for sex, it is critical, and also for delivery. Without oxytocin, mammals cannot deliver. And then secondly, oxytocin is very important for lactation. Without oxytocin, mammals cannot lactate their offspring. Without oxytocin, therefore, there would be no life, at least not mammalian life. Okay? So if we take out oxytocin, whether this is ethical or not is another conference, but if we would take out oxytocin, there would be no reproduction, there would be no offspring, and if there is any offspring by accident, it would not be fed and thus die. Now, fortunately, oxytocin does also a couple of other things. And there has been a tremendous surge in research showing that oxytocin also has, in addition to these neurophysiological effects, all kinds of effects on our cognitions, on our motivations, and our very social behaviors. And this is a complex slide, I won't go into detail here. Essentially what it says here is that upon the release of oxytocin in our brain, we have a downregulation of avoidance and withdrawal tendencies, and we have an upregulation of biobehavioral approach. We like to approach more what is nice, and we are less avoidant of what is nasty and negative. So when there is nasty, negative things, our immediate response is to run away and to shut down. But oxytocin suppresses that flight response, thereby allowing us to do other things. For example, to aggressively approach that negative stimulus. And then, as I said, oxytocin also allows you to approach positive things. And negative things may be those of rivaling outgroups, and positive things may be people in your own in-group who are familiar with you and who have been shown to be trustworthy. So what oxytocin might do, indeed, is it upregulates a tendency to cater for and approach those of your own group, and it may also reduce the tendency to withdraw and run away from those who are seen as negative, unfamiliar, and potentially threatening. All right, that's what oxytocin does. And there's this very nice little picture on the bottom right, which basically shows meerkats. And this is a beautiful study done by British colleagues who went into Africa and had these wild colonies of meerkats. And one colony, they infused them with a placebo, had no effects. And the other colony was infused with oxytocin. And then they observed the natural behavior of these colonies of animals. And the comparison between those showed that those infused with oxytocin had more sex, played more with their offspring, searched for food more, did all kinds of positive things. And in addition, they did one thing more. And that is, under oxytocin, these animals spend more time on guard. That is, that animal standing on top of the hill, looking around for danger. And that's a very risky behavior. It's hot, and predators, single you out immediately. So spending time on guard is self-sacrificial to the benefit of your own group. And under oxytocin, these animals spend longer time on guard. Apparently, among these animals, when you're done spending time on guard, you're hungry or you're tired, you basically signal to the next one to take over your turn. And if you stand there longer, it means that the next one has more time to feed, reproduce, and do all kinds of other nice things. Okay, how do we study this? We give people an intranasal spray of oxytocin or placebo. Neither the experimenter nor the subject knows what he or she is getting. After they take the nasal spray, the experimenter leaves, and we wait for about 30 minutes for the oxytocin to start having its effects on the brain and the body. We use about 30 subjects on average per treatment, that is for oxytocin versus placebo. And after these 30 minutes, people basically go through these investment games, and as I've explained to you earlier. So here is one particular example. Basically what people see on the screen is this, a short picture, cartoon, and a small text that says, imagine that you work as a night watch when you discover that deadly gases are leaking into that room with 5 beds, and it will kill 5 people. Now you can run up the ladder and turn off the ventilation system, and if you do so, these 5 people will be saved, but the gases will leak into the room with 1 bed, and the person laying there will die. So it's up to you. You don't do anything, 5 people die, you turn off the gas and the ventilation system, 1 person will die. Now we had one small trick in here. When we didn't talk about the names, we didn't give the names of the 5 people, but we gave the name of the person in the single room. And we either called this person by a Dutch male name, Gerben or Pieter, or in one variation of the study, we used Arab names, Mohammed, Youssef, or in another study, we used German names. Now, Germans are in the Netherlands a rivaling outgroup, especially close to soccer matches, which was in the context of this study the case. So either you have Gerben or Pieter, or you have Youssef or Mohammed or Helmut or Jorgen. What we see here, people were given oxytocin or placebo. And what you see here, if you go to the right-hand side, the top one is with Arab names, the bottom one is with German names. There's no difference between Arab and German names. Behaves precisely the same thing. But what we see is that if we give people a placebo, we don't see any significant difference in how they treat the outgroup compared to their in-group. If we give people oxytocin, there is a lowered tendency to sacrifice someone with a Dutch origin than someone with a rivaling foreign origin. And the important thing is that the gray bars don't differ from each other, whereas the white bars do. And this means that under oxytocin, people do not become more willing to sacrifice outgroup members, they become less willing to sacrifice an in-group member. Oxytocin upregulates in-group love rather than out-group hate. Okay? And that's a very important thing, because it shows again, as we've seen in the large meta-analysis, that the key motivation for people to cater to self-sacrifice for their own group is to benefit their own group rather to create differences in a competitive advantage vis-a-vis outgroups. Okay, this was nicely replicated in China, you see here. I will show you one more study and then I'll wrap up. This is again the same study, the same paradigm that we have. People were randomly divided into three groups of six people were randomly divided into two groups of three and made investments into in-group love or out-group hate, or they could keep their money. Prior to making their investment decisions, they were given oxytocin or placebo. And what you see here is the result. If people were given placebo on the left-hand side, we see that they contribute about €2 to their own group, and they contribute about the same amount to out-group spite. And they take home about €6. This is a pattern that we typically see in this type of game. If we look at the right-hand side, when people were given oxytocin, we see that they do not give more nor less money to out-group spite. Their out-group hate doesn't change compared to the placebo. But their in-group love almost doubles. They now spend over €4 out of pocket on their own group. Again, what this shows, before it was kind of, fictitious, yes, I would sacrifice this person. Here we see this is out-of-pocket money that people spend on their own group, more under oxytocin compared to placebo. And again, what follows here is that people are willing to self-sacrifice for their own group, and that oxytocin seems to be an important neurobiological substrate driving up or motivating and sustaining that type of parochial altruism. We have replicated it in other studies. Here is a very nice coin flip study. Okay, I'll give you this one. So, what people do here in this particular task, they are shown a coin on the screen. And we're going to flip the coin. And you are asked, a priori, before you flip the coin, to make a private prediction whether it will be heads or tails. Don't tell me your prediction. Just keep it in your mind. We're now going to flip the coin, and it shows heads. Did you predict this a priori or not? If you say, yes, I predicted this, I will give you 10 cents. If you said, no, sorry, I did not predict this, I will give you nothing. Okay? Easy task, right? We do this 50 times. You can earn 50 times 10 cents by consistently telling me that you got it right. And there is no way for me to tell you you're lying, except that this is a genuine coin that has a 50% probability of ending up tails or heads. So if you tell me out of 50 times that you got it 50 times right, you're lying. And the question now is, do we see differences in lying as a function of whether we give people oxytocin or placebo? Of course not. There should be no neurobiological reason why people are more or less lying. However, what would happen if the money that you earn by lying not only goes to yourself, but also to other people in your group who do a similar task? What would happen then? And here's the result. If people work only for themselves, they lie a little bit, as we've seen in earlier work, and oxytocin has no effect whatsoever. But if people are lying for their group, under oxytocin, their lying becomes much more extreme. As you can see, the dotted bars over there, they show that when the lie benefits the group, people start to lie more, especially if they have been given oxytocin. Another instance of how self-sacrifice, here sacrificing the moral obligation, thou shalt tell the truth, we sacrifice that again for the benefit of the group, not for the benefit of ourselves. So, I'd like to conclude very quickly with a couple of things. Humans are, I think, based on this research and studies that others have done, humans are biologically prepared to self-sacrifice for their own group. Throughout evolutionary times, there have been tremendous selection pressures on our biological system that allows us, most of us these days, to self-sacrifice, but to the benefit of our own groups and not to the benefit of some general collective. I skipped the second one, I haven't shown you the data, but one of the reasons we've seen in our research is that they do this in part to keep up a reputation of a good and reliable group member. So we rally together, we shout, and we even fight and aggress outgroups, not because we hate the outgroup, but because it makes us look good and loyal in the eyes of our fellow group members. And we do so without much thinking. We don't need our prefrontal cortex to engage in parochial self-sacrifice. We may need our executive control to plan ahead, to think carefully about how we're going to do it, to organize others into doing this, but the impulse to do it can be released without thinking. And finally, our tendency to self-sacrifice, as I said, benefits the in-group and is not motivated by a desire to hurt out-groups, except when the out-group is really threatening us. And then we have a very basic impulse, again also oxytocin-driven, to aggress against the out-group. Let's call that the preemptive strike. The problem, of course, is that if I launch a preemptive strike on you, you would see me as aggressive and deserving of retaliation. And that's where conflict spirals up. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Carsten de Dreu, for your speech over the oxytocin. In fact, that is a kind of intergroupal love hormone, apparently.